Paris, the year 1750. In a candlelit coffee house, the man thought to be the finest player alive sits down with the white pieces. He is the Sire de Legal de Care M. Or, and in a moment he will appear to throw his queen away by mistake and leave behind the only game of his that survives. If a quiet game like this is how you'd like to fall asleep, take a moment to subscribe. There's a new one each week. This is very old chess, more than 2.5 centuries behind us now. The place is the Café de la Régence, where masters gathered for hours over cups of coffee and unhurried games. Legal was a teacher as well as a champion. His finest pupil, a young man named Philidor, would one day surpass him entirely. But not yet. Tonight the old master is at his board, and across from him sits an opponent remembered only as Saint Brie. What follows gave its name to a famous little trap, Legal's mate. This was the romantic age of chess, long before clocks and theory, when a player prized a daring attack far above a safe little point. Legal de Care More was the reigning lion of that age, the strongest player in France through the middle of the century, holding court at this single board for years on end. He gave odds to almost everyone, often a whole night, and still won, and from his chair the modern French school of chess was quietly born. His pupil Philidor would carry that school out into the world and write the book that taught Europe how to play. But the master left only this one game behind. Of his opponent, almost nothing is known. A gentleman called Saint Brie, a name kept alive by a single evening, and by the trap he walked into. 2.5 centuries later, that trap is still the first thing a child is shown when learning to beware a gift. It has outlived everything else about both men. The queen offered up like a gift, 3 small pieces stepping quietly forward, a net closing around the king in one of the oldest and loveliest tricks in all of chess. So close your eyes, let the board take shape in the dark behind them, the pieces in their places, the 2 armies set, the kings still home, nothing yet decided, waiting. White has the move, and white begins the way so many great games begin. The king's pawn steps forward 2 squares, to e4. A small step, and the whole center belongs to white for a moment. That single pawn does quiet work. It opens a road for the queen, and a longer road for the light bishop, slanting out toward the far side of the board. Nothing is threatened yet, only doors opening. Black answers in kind. A pawn of his own, forward 2 to e5. The 2 pawns stand a square apart, facing one another, neither able to touch the other. It is the soundest reply there is. Modern analysis offers nothing better. The center is shared now, evenly, like 2 hands resting on the same table. White brings out a piece. The king's knight rises to f3. And as it lands, it looks straight at that black pawn on e5. One attacker on a pawn with no defender yet. The knight leans on that pawn, and the pawn has no friend to lean back on. A colder, modern eye calls this the cleanest move on the booker. So already, there is a small question on the board, asked very softly, how black will keep that pawn safe. Again, this is the finest move available. Develop and threaten in a single breath. Black gives his answer. A pawn comes forward 1 square to d6. Quietly, it props up the pawn on e5. Now the knight's stare meets a wall. It is solid, it is careful, it is a little modest too. Because that same pawn on d6 closes a door in front of black's dark bishop. He has chosen safety over freedom, a house with the curtains drawn. There was a livelier path, A knight to c6 would have guarded the pawn and woken a piece in one stroke, and it is now seen as the stronger choice. Instead, the pawn does the guarding, and the dark bishop stays shut in behind it. Safe, but a step slower than it needed to be. White is a step ahead in waking his pieces, and he means to keep that lead. So now the light bishop comes out. It slides to c4 and takes up a long, beautiful diagonal. Follow that diagonal with your mind's eye from c4 across the open board. It runs all the way down to a single square near the black king. The square f7. Hold that square in your thoughts. It matters more than any other on the board. Because f7 is the one weak point in black's house. Every other pawn around the king is guarded by a piece. That one is guarded by the king alone. It is the square a beginner is warned about first, because only the king tends it, and a king is a poor guard. The bishop simply waits there, patient. The bishop has not touched it. It only looks, but it never looks away. This is the old wisdom of the opening, played out slow. Knight and bishop both pointing inward toward the soft heart of the other side. Now it is black's move, and here the story truly begins to turn. Black reaches for his light bishop, the one on c8. And he sends it out all the way to g4. Now picture what that bishop does from g4. It looks back along its own diagonal, straight at the white knight on f3. And behind that knight, on the same line, sits the white queen, still at home on d1. A colder, modern eye would rather have finished developing a knight to f6, the bishop to e7, and castled the king into safety before reaching for tricks. The pin looks aggressive, yet it commits a piece to the far side and leaves the king sitting in the center. That hesitation is the seed of everything that follows. This is a pin. The knight is caught between the bishop in front of it and its own queen behind. If that knight were ever to step aside, the bishop's gaze would fall upon the queen. And no one gives up a queen to save a knight. So, in black's mind, the matter is settled. The knight on f3 is frozen, nailed in place, unable to move. And if the knight cannot move, then the pawn on e5 is safe behind it forever. You can almost feel black's quiet satisfaction. He has tied a white piece down and kept his own pawn whole. It feels clever, it feels strong. And this is exactly where the beauty of this little game is hiding. Because a pin lives only in the mind that respects it. The knight is pinned to the queen, but a knight is not chained to the queen. It can still leap, it can still strike. The only cost is the queen herself. Most players would never pay such a price. Almost no one would even look. One diagonal carries black's bishop onto the white queen. The other carries white's bishop down onto f7 and the black king. Two lines of force crossing in the middle of a calm-looking board. Black is sure the pin holds everything together, and white is looking at that frozen knight and beginning, very quietly, to wonder what it would cost to let it move. White brings the last sleeping piece to life. The knight on b1 swings across to c3. A natural move. It guards the pawn on e4 and it looks toward the heart of the board. Nothing seems to be happening yet. Just two armies leaning toward the center. It is a calm, useful move, though modern analysis would push the center pawn forward instead, straight at the heart of black's cramped position. But look again at the bishop on g4, sitting on black's side of the board. It stares down a long diagonal. g4, f3, e2, d1. And on f3 stands white's knight, pinned. It cannot move without bearing the queen behind it. Hold that thread in your mind. It is the whole story to come. Now it is black's turn, and black makes a small, soft move. The pawn in front of the king's knight slides forward, g7 to g6. A quiet step. Perhaps a home is being made for the dark bishop to sit on g7 and gaze across the long diagonal. It is not a mistake you would scold, but it is a little slow. The patient path was a knight to c6, developing a piece and guarding the pawn on e5. That single pawn on e5 is doing a great deal of work, and it has very few friends. With g6 instead, no new defender arrives. The pawn stands a touch more alone. This is the moment a colder eye marks as the real slip. One loose pawn, one missing defender, and the door to the famous trap swings open. A small thing, the kind of thing that only matters if someone is paying very close attention. White is paying very close attention. And now comes the move this whole game is remembered for. The pinned knight moves. From f3, it leaps forward and takes the pawn on e5. Let that settle for a moment. The pinned knight has moved. The shield has stepped aside, and behind it the white queen sits on d1, suddenly in the open. The bishop on g4 looks straight down the diagonal at her. Nothing stands between them now. And here is the secret the pin hid. The knight does not merely escape, it captures, and it strikes at f7 and the pawn shield in the same breath. Modern analysis confirms it cold. This is simply the best move on the board, and white stands clearly better whatever black now chooses. To almost any eye, this looks like a terrible blunder. White is simply hanging the queen. Take the queen, and surely white is lost. That is what the position whispers. But it is a lie. This is the famous trap. The queen is bait. White has seen further than the loss of the queen. White has seen all the way to the end. Now black must choose, and here the game turns on a single decision. There was a safe road. Quietly recapture the knight with the d6 pawn, taking on e5. Then white would have answered by taking the bishop on g4 with the queen, and the storm would have passed. Black would be down only a single pawn, a long, dull game, but a living one. That was the road not taken. Instead, the queen was too tempting to leave standing. The bishop sweeps down the diagonal from g4 all the way to d1 and takes the white queen. The most powerful piece on the board gone, carried off. 300 years on, this exact lunge is still named for the old Frenchman, the one trap every beginner is taught to fear. If you were sitting across the board, you would feel a flush of triumph, the queen in your hand. It is the losing move, the one mistake the whole trap was built to invite. A colder eye sees it at once as the one move that loses on the spot. Even keeping the bishop back, away from the queen, would have left black merely worse, not lost. Because white never wanted that queen. White wanted the king. Picture the board now, very clearly, before the blow falls. Black's king still sits on its first rank, on e8, with no pawn shield in front of it now. The black bishop is far away on d1, deep in white's camp, holding the captured queen. White's pieces, meanwhile, are gathered close around the black king. A knight sits on e5, planted in the center. A bishop stands on c4, aiming down its bright diagonal straight at f7. And f7 is the tender square, the one guarded only by the king itself. A second knight waits on c3, ready to spring. Now white strikes. The bishop on c4 takes the pawn on f7, and it gives check. The bishop lands right beside the black king, touching it. Check. Only the bishop, not the knight, gives this check. It is the move that drives the king forward, and modern analysis sees the mate already, just 2 moves away. The king is in danger and must move at once. Could the king simply take the bishop? It is right there. But to take it would pull the king further into the open, with the knights waiting. No safety down that road. So the king steps sideways instead, from e8 to e7. This is the best square left to it, and still it is not enough. The king has walked forward, out into the air, onto e7. Closed it is now, no pawns in front, enemy pieces all around. Let us look once more at the whole board, in the last quiet breath before the end. The black king stands alone on e7. White's bishop sits on f7, just to the king's side, covering both e8 and e6 along its diagonal. The square behind the king and the square just ahead of it already taken away. White's knight on e5 reaches its quiet arms toward d7 and towards c6 and g6. So the king cannot slip back to d7 either. That door is shut. And White's other knight still waits on c3, the only piece yet to speak. Black's pieces are scattered and asleep. The far bishop on d1. The rooks and queen and knights still on the back rank, doing nothing. Everything white owns points at one lonely king. Everything black owns looks the other way. Now the last piece moves. The knight on c3 leaps to d5. And that is checkmate. Let it hang there for a moment. Checkmate with the queen long gone. From d5, the knight reaches out and gives check to the king on e7. A knight's check cannot be blocked. Nothing can step into the way of it. So the king must run, or the knight must fall. Let us try every door softly. Back to e8. The bishop on f7 covers it. No. Forward to e6. The same bishop covers that too. No. Sideways to d7. The knight on e5 is watching that square. No. Up to f6. The new knight on d5 guards it. No. Every square around the king is taken, each one held by a different white piece. Then surely the checking knight can be captured? Look for a defender of d5. The black queen on d8 is blocked by its own pawn on d6. No knight reaches it. No pawn attacks it. The bishop is far away on d1, facing the wrong way. The little knight stands on d5, untouchable, and the king has nowhere to go. This was the one square that did everything at once, checking the king, while a knight and a bishop quietly held every flight square. The road not taken, grabbing a stray piece instead, would have thrown the win away. Checkmate. A bishop and 2 knights woven together into a perfect net. And the queen, the great prize that was taken with such joy, never mattered at all. That was the trick of it. White gave away the strongest piece to keep the 3 small ones in exactly the right places. 3 modest pieces, each guarding one escape, each finishing the work of the others. This is why the game has been told and retold for hundreds of years. Legal himself left no other game, no treatise, only a reputation passed mouth to mouth. This single evening is the whole of what we keep. A queen offered as bait, a king drawn one step into the open, a knight landing softly to close the door. The whole pattern fits in the palm of your hand, and yet it has fooled players for centuries. There is nothing left to play. The king cannot move, cannot hide, cannot be saved. The board falls still. The pieces stand where they finished. The bishop on f7, 2 knights on e5 and d5, the lonely king on e7. Let the board fade into the dark, gently, just as it is. The game is finished. Let it rest. And there the board rests, the last move made, the pieces still where they fell. Let the squares fade now, light and dark loosening into one soft grey. The kings, the pawns, the long diagonals, all of it dimming quietly. Nothing left to defend, nothing left to chase. The game is finished, and it will keep exactly as it was for whenever you wish to find it again. There is nothing more for you to follow. You can let the picture go. Feel how still the room is, how easy the dark. The board is gone now, dissolved into the quiet. Sleep well. Good night. Good night.